I don't think any movies were actually released in 2020, were they? Hang on, I'll just double check. Hi guys, so it turns out that movies were still getting released in 2020, just not with the same regularity. It was, of course, the year where COVID spread around the world and everything was getting cancelled left, right and centre. I've never had COVID, not to my knowledge anyway. The rest of my family have, who I live with. They've all tested positive at various points over the last 3 years, but I've always come back negative. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just not shoving the thing up my nose far enough, but as far as I know, never had it. It's a bit of a weird thing, but in terms of this year for movies, I can tell you I've seen 14, which is not the normal amount that I've seen in you know, if you've watched a lot of these videos, but I actually thought it might come out less than that. I wasn't looking forward to 2020. I thought I'll get to that year and it'll turn out I've seen about 6 movies or something, and what am I going to do for a video? But 14's a reasonable amount. It's sort of on a par with some of the amounts I had for those really early videos I did in this series back at the beginning of the 70s. I think for a lot of those early 70s videos, I was doing like 11, 10 films per video, or you know, something like that. So 14's fine. I was a little bit concerned that with only having this many, I would get a couple of subpar films going through to the grand final, but that's not happened, honestly. Like, the top 4 today are just wonderful films that I would give 5 out of 5 to if I was going to review them today. We've got some duffers down at the bottom as well. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but let's get into it. But before we do, the usual disclaimer that the top 2 films today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, which is not far off now. And when I do that final, I will be revealing once and for all what is the greatest film of all time. But for now, let's concentrate on COVID year, and we'll start with the film that I consider to be my 14th and therefore least favourite film that came out this year. This is the 7th and final Tremors film, and it's also the one that made me not care whether they made any more, because this is hands down the worst Tremors film to have ever been made. It's truly awful. I have done a full review for it if you care to dig it out, if you want to hear my full thoughts, but wow, this is a bad one. The cinematography is really good, but apart from that, everything else just completely sucks. Like, the idea's all right. I mean, on paper, this sounds like an all right movie. This idea of rich people taking some of the worms and putting them on like an island and turning it into a kind of hard target, surviving the game type scenario. But the movie you get is nothing like that. It's just mostly Richard Brake and Burt Gummer just winding each other up. A few dodgy CGI kills and an uninspiring distant relation subplot that we've seen all before. I just felt really sleepy watching this film. It's really bad and was a very obvious choice to come bottom today. I saw this one in the cinema, but I soon regretted that because this is absolutely terrible. Again, it's another one set on an island, so our first 2 films today are both horror films set on an island, but both of them deserve to be marooned on their own special little desert island and just forgotten about forever, because they're just absolutely crass, both films. This one has a little bit of promise in the early stages when you get all these colourful characters arriving on this holiday resort place, and they're expecting some kind of role play, I think, but what they end up getting is, of course, death for the most part. I think there's a bit of a supernatural flavour to this once it gets to the second half, which is absolutely not what was required for this movie at all. Big mistake. But it's just really boring. I was sat there with my banana milkshake in the cinema, just totally lamenting the fact that I had bothered to leave the house. Honestly, this must be one of the worst films that Blumhouse have ever released in cinemas. Things get a little bit better here, but not much. This is about a group of guys who go to a rock concert and they get chatting to a small group of really attractive girls, and they all decide to go to this house party after the concert, and that's where the horror begins. And I won't say what that horror consists of. I will leave that for you to discover, but I don't think this film chooses its own adventure very well from around about the point that the characters get to the house, which is a shame because I quite enjoyed the build up to this, you know, the slow build up and the concert itself and all the characters getting to know each other and stuff. The film had promise and then it just kind of chucked it away, sadly. It does have Alexandra Daddario in it. She played the final girl in Texas Chainsaw 3D. I really like her as an actress, and she does kind of just elevate this film a tiny bit for me personally, but it's not enough to save it. It's a very mediocre movie, the sort of thing that you might find on Netflix but you've never heard of before. Now we're into the good ones, so I'm happier. This is a Liam Neeson thriller. It's about a guy who wants to turn himself in because he's spent a lot of his life robbing banks and he feels guilty about that, but he can't turn himself in yet because there's a rogue FBI agent who wants to kill him because of reasons. The plot is more complicated than that. I've just given you a stripped down, simplified version of it, but this is an alright film. It's not one of Neeson's best, but it helped me pass an evening, and it might do the same for you, although it's certainly not one that I would ever go back to, I think. This is another one I saw in the cinema, and I thought I would like it because Mila Jovovich is in this film. She was the star of all those Resident Evil films, which I really like, and also her husband, Paul Anderson, who directed a lot of those Resident Evil films. He was the director of this one, Monster Hunter. They do like to collaborate on a lot of films, these two, and I guess this was their next big project after Resident Evil together. I thought it would be a bit like that, you know, a bit like Resident Evil, just in, you know, a different setting with slightly different monsters, but I thought the film would give me a lot of the same feels, but it didn't really do that. You know, it has its moments, this film, but I was ready for the exit by the end. It just wasn't really for me. I never played the video game either. Monster Hunter was originally a video game. I remember they brought out one for the PS4 about 3 or 4 years ago, and I watched a few trailers and looked a bit of the footage of it, and I just didn't really fancy it. I didn't think it would be for me. I gave this movie a try, and it turns out the movie wasn't for me either, so there we go. And this film didn't do very well at the box office as well, mainly because of COVID, I guess, but the film's not that great either. So if Jovovich and Anderson were hoping that this was going to be their next 6-film franchise, I imagine they were sorely disappointed. It's just occurred to me, rechecking my notes, that there's no Marvel films this year, is there? They weren't going to risk that shit, were they? They wanted every penny of those billions. They weren't going to put any movies out anywhere near COVID. And there was meant to be a Bond film in 2020, wasn't there? But that got put back to 2021 as well. Anything really big got moved, I think, from 2020. Anyway, Spree, pretty decent film. It's about a guy who, he drives a taxi cab or something, but he wants to be like a famous YouTuber like his friend. So his friend from high school has got like 1 million subs, and he's really jealous of him. But the trouble is, he's not got like a good YouTube persona, so he can't get the same amount of subscribers, basically. So he comes up with one last desperate gambit. He drives around in this taxi cab and starts killing people and broadcasting this live on the net. And suddenly the views and the subs are going up because people are coming across this wild murder spree video and they're loving it. I mean, there's no long-term strategy in this, is there? You're going to get arrested long before you get monetized, but as a film, it's quite entertaining. It's very original, darkly funny at times. It did have 1 or 2 issues with it. I can't remember now because it's been a while since I saw it, but I'd certainly recommend it as something to watch at least once. This was the last film I saw in the cinema before the first lockdown, and it was kind of a depressing time. I remember the night that I saw this, they'd already shut down the cafe in the cinema, and the toilets were shut down as well. They had this porta cabin set up outside the cinema, which was really weird. So if you wanted to go to the toilet halfway through the film, you had to go outside and go into this porta cabin. It was just weird and depressing, and you could tell that the cinema were just trying to, you know, squeeze out a couple more days of business before the government finally said, no, you're done. You know, everywhere's locked down. The film itself is actually pretty good. So this is about a group of people who all wake up in a field, and they've been drugged and kidnapped, basically, to be hunted for sport by rich people. Yeah, it's one of those. But this is really fun, even though it's got a simple premise. The people that have been kidnapped in this film, they're all fairly weak, normal people, apart from this one woman who is an ex-soldier. And the bad guys have really made a mistake by kidnapping this woman because she is so tough. She's so highly skilled. She's like really overpowered compared to the bad guys, which is what makes this film a lot of fun. It reminds me of the Under Siege movies where the terrorists are just never anywhere near Casey Ryback's level and he just stomps all over them like they're ants or something. If this film, The Hunt, if it cocks up slightly towards the end, it's the fact that somehow the main character is a little bit neutered for the final fight. It's like they didn't have the bottle to just have this woman turn up for the final fight and just kick the main bad woman's arse because they thought that would be a lame ending to the movie. But what we get instead, this massive big 10-minute fight where they seem to be quite evenly matched somehow, and all the objects in the house are getting broken. It's just too much for me, and it doesn't match what we've seen from this character up until that point, because up until that final fight, I would have said this isn't going to be any kind of final fight. She'll just completely kick her ass in about 2 seconds. So I just feel like the end of this movie has been a little bit too Hollywoodized. In Under Siege 1, when Seagal puts that knife in Tommy Lee Jones's forehead, it doesn't make the movie worse. The fact that he's done that fairly easily without much of a struggle. It's just the natural conclusion to the movie, and it's fine, But The Hunt just bottles it a little bit, which is a shame. But this is still worth watching once, because everything up to that final fight is a pretty amusing time. I really like this main character in this film. This is the solo movie for Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. She was the standout for me in the Suicide Squad movie from 2016, albeit that wasn't a very good film. Correction, it wasn't a very well edited film. I still think that if they go back and rejig that movie in terms of the material they shot, I still think they could do something with that, but it wasn't treated very well post-production. But anyway, the Birds of Prey movie is a really good time. It's gory as hell, it's funny, it's got a really complicated plot that's quite well written. It's not told in chronological order, but it's good, really good. The only thing that lets it down is the ending. Again, like there's this dodgy sequence where the characters are they're doing fights but on roller skates, and it just doesn't feel very realistic. It's a bit out of keeping with the rest of the film, which is quite hard-edged for the most part. You've got Ewan McGregor in this as a villain. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, an actress I really like, pops up playing a character with like a bow and arrow. Yeah, it's good. I can't imagine that this would come near the bottom of any DC ranking that I was to do anyway, although just bear in mind with this that from what I can recall, the trailer was absolutely awful. It just made the movie look cheesy and crap. If you're the type of person who judges movies, or you decide whether to watch a movie based on a trailer, don't do it on this occasion, because this is one of those times where the movie is way better than the trailer. I was reviewing a film the other day called The Reef 2, which was directed by the same guy who directed this film, Blackwater 2, or Blackwater Abyss, if you like. He did a much better job with this sequel than he did with Reef 2. This is a really good film. It's a creature feature. It's crocodiles in underground caves, and the water's rising, and we've got people stranded down there. It's really exciting. I saw this in the cinema during a period of time where cinemas had reopened after the initial lockdown, but they didn't have any blockbuster movies to show because studios were still really nervous about putting their films out there. So for a little glorious period, you could go to the cinema and watch all these old classics that they were putting on, because they were just showing whatever they could get their hands on and hoping that people would show up. I saw Evil Dead 1 in the cinema around about this time. I saw the original Halloween. It was kind of a cool period to go to the cinema, actually. I sort of wish it had lasted a little bit longer, this little stretch of time. I also got to see this film. Not a film that is like an old classic, but it had originally come out in the cinemas like a little bit earlier on, like maybe a year beforehand. So this was my second chance to see it, and I grabbed it with both hands. If not for COVID, I wouldn't have seen this in the cinema. But I got to see it, and for what it is, it's very well executed. It's worth seeing. So the first Deep Blue Sea film came out in the late 90s, and it was this big budget thing that was like hoping to be the next Jaws. And even though it didn't quite achieve that, it was very well received, and I think even today it is regarded as one of the best shark films ever made. Much, much later down the line, they did two direct-to-video Deep Blue Sea sequels, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information here to hold you in good stead for the rest of your lives. Deep Blue Sea 2 and 3, despite being on a much lesser budget, are both better than the big budget first film. I'm not speaking for the majority with this opinion. It is probably mostly just me who thinks that, but I don't know, I'm not massively into the first one. I think I enjoyed it on first watch, but I don't think the characters in that first film are very good, even though you do have this big, massive research station, and I guess the production value is very strong, but I don't know, I just prefer 2 and 3, personally, when it comes to this series. This third one is a lot of fun. It's set on like this little man-made shanty island just off the coast of Madagascar, I think. We've got like genetically altered sharks again, and we've got terrorists in the mix, and the final death of the shark in this, one of the best shark deaths I've ever seen. It's gory and squelchy and satisfying, and it's just the most amazing cheer moment. So yeah, Deep Blue Sea 2 and 3 are pretty fantastic. I don't think I remember to include Deep Blue Sea 2 when I did my whatever year that would have been included in. I just don't remember talking about it in these videos, so maybe I forgot to include it, but number 3 is pretty much as good as number 2. The only shame about number 3 is that the actress from number 2, Danielle Savre, who was really good in that film, doesn't come back for this one, but that's only a small thing. For the most part, I thoroughly enjoyed this film, and I'm slightly sad that they're not going to be doing a number 4. So we've arrived at those 4 masterpiece films that I promised you, and right now I am absolutely stunned that this film is not going through to my favourite 100 films of all time, because it is a masterpiece for me, and it had such an advantage today, getting to take part in a much reduced field, you know, but it's only come 4th. It's crazy, but this film is so good. It's directed by Leigh Whannell. I did see it in the cinema when I got the opportunity. I was gripped within about 5 seconds of this film starting, because the first thing you see in this is a woman waking up in bed next to her husband, and she's trying to get out of bed really slowly so not to wake him, but she's terrified, and she then tries to escape from this really large mansion type house whilst trying not to set off alarms and whilst trying not to wake up her husband. But she's so petrified, this woman. You watch this thinking to yourself, Jesus, what kind of marriage is going on here that we haven't seen anything of yet? It's just a great way to open a movie, and this is before we even get to any of the Invisible Man stuff, but when we do get to that, there are some really scary scenes. Like, Leigh Whannell just milks this setup for all of its worth. There's so many sequences where you're watching characters interact with each other and you're not even sure if maybe the Invisible Man is in the room or not. It's really unsettling when you watch it, and the only thing that maybe just lets this film down a smidgen, which might have influenced why it hasn't made the top 3 today. There is a twist of sorts which happens in the final act, which I just kind of feel was maybe unnecessary. I'm not sure actually, but I remember when I saw that, I thought to myself, not sure you needed to do that. The film is so damn good as it is. I don't think you needed to spice things up with 20 minutes to go, but whatever. This film is absolutely phenomenal. Let's not get away from that. And if you've not seen it, you absolutely have to. This is another fantastic one, and I guess you'd have to say that it's today's unlucky film that doesn't quite make it into those 2 qualification spots. Saint Maud is about a woman who, so she's a care worker, but before this movie begins, she's been fired from her job, and we never actually find out why, not in any proper way anyway. We get these blurry flashbacks where things aren't properly explained. We have to kind of guess what she's done wrong in her previous job. Probably accidentally killed somebody or given them the wrong medication or something like that. It's a little bit hazy though. But she gets this new job caring for this wealthy woman in Scarborough, but all isn't right with this woman. She's ultra religious, but she doesn't have any friends or a love life. She talks to herself all the time. she does these internal monologues where you can just tell that she's really, two cans short of a six pack, and she doesn't really get on with anybody in her new workplace, as small as it is. And we can just tell as we're watching this film that we're heading for horror and tragedy, and that's exactly what happens. I won't reveal where we go with this, but it's just a riveting piece of work. It was done by a first-time director, a woman who, I'm not sure she's even done anything since this, but it's a really masterful film. My first viewing of it was a little bit spoiled because I saw it in the cinema, but these three guys came into the cinema. They weren't English. They were speaking in a foreign language. I don't know what nationality they were, but literally from the first second the movie started, they were just incessantly talking, these three, and they were pissing everybody off in the cinema, and people were trying to get them to shut up. And this went on for like 10-15 minutes. It was just cringeworthy. It was embarrassing, and eventually they just walked out. I don't even know why they bothered going, honestly. So they just left after 15 minutes of being criticised by these other people. But by that point, I pretty much had the first 15 minutes of the film ruined for me. I was playing catch up after that. Do you know what I mean? I was playing catch up with the dialogue and this character. So it wasn't one of my best cinema experiences. But when I rewatched the film at home, I saw it a second time, and I think I did a third viewing as well because the film was that good. I came to realise after the third viewing that for me this is a 5 out of 5 movie. But I think I did a review for this on the channel after the initial cinema trip, and only gave it like 3.5 out of 5. Quite probably influenced by the fact that I'd just not had a good time watching the movie, maybe. Although maybe I just needed more viewings of this to properly let it settle in my mind. But it's a really good film. It's not as exciting as The Invisible Man, but it is more flawless, I would say. But hey-ho, let's now get on and find out which two films will be going through to the grand final, starting with my film at number 2. This is one I wanted to watch at the cinema, but for some reason I couldn't find it showing anywhere. I was literally looking out for this film because I'd been looking forward to it. And being near a big city, it's not like I'm short of cinemas that I can reach potentially, but I was checking all my local cinemas for when this film came out, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't get it. This film didn't do that well at the box office, but how is it supposed to do well if nobody can actually find it to watch it? It doesn't make any sense. But I saw it at home at some point later, and it didn't massively blow me away on first watch. It's a weird one, this, but I bought the Blu-ray. I must have seen enough in it to get the Blu-ray, but when I got the Blu-ray, like with St. Maud, my opinion of it just kept going up and up, and now I just think it's an absolutely wonderful movie. It's about a deep sea research station on the ocean bed. It's really far down, this place, like dangerously far down. And something goes wrong with it, the way up gets blocked, or there's like an explosion or something, and the few characters that survive this initial explosion are just trapped on the ocean bed. They've got to put on these massive spacesuit type things and try and walk across the ocean floor to get to some other abandoned stations that possibly they can use to survive until they can think of a way out of this situation. But they're running out of air, and there's like these alien creatures down there which they didn't previously know about. So they've got all sorts of problems, but it's a really exciting film, like really, really exciting. Kirsten Stewart is the lead in this. Finally, I think I'm ready to forgive her for all those shitty Twilight films she did, because she's pretty damn good in this. In fact, I officially absolve her of all of her past cinematic crimes. She's very good, and I can't recommend this film highly enough. It's extremely exciting. It's got really good production value. It's like Aliens meets Jaws. Just put it on your watch list. This is another one I saw at the cinema, and it was also, I think, the second film that I reviewed on the channel way back in the early days. I probably made an absolute hash of trying to review it, but by God, this is a great film. It's not an easy one to explain the plot of. It sort of involves time travel, but people end up travelling backwards in the opposite direction of people who are going forwards. It just sounds wacky if you try and explain it to someone, but it has to be seen to be believed. It's just an amazing film. Not easy to get on a first viewing. Like, I came out of the cinema having not quite fully made my mind up about it. I had to watch it a second time for me to suddenly think, yeah, this is absolutely great. Actually, I really love this. It's quite a long film. I think it's like 2.5 hours, but it's brilliantly plotted. It's got some really good characters in it, and the story is just so clever. It's like nothing you would have ever seen before. It must have taken a great set of imaginations to have come up with this, because it's just truly magnificent. I'm going to have to do a Christopher Nolan ranking at some point, because I have seen most of his films now, and for me, this is one of the best. I don't think this is massively well regarded by the general movie-loving public. It's not a film that I hear bandied about that much, but maybe a lot of people just watched this the one time and didn't fully get it. I don't know, but certainly if you watch this more than once, you will be well rewarded for that, because I got so much out of it the second time that I didn't the first time. If you do watch it, put yourself in that mindset that you're going to be willing to pause the movie at various points just to process what you've seen, because this is a plot that can get away from you very, very quickly if you're not paying attention. And if you watch it with somebody else, make an agreement beforehand that it's fine to pause the movie and discuss certain elements of it. That's my advice anyway, but it is a masterpiece for me. It's a wonderful piece of work. I feel like watching it again right now that I'm thinking about it. And I got a great deal on the 4K for this. I think I got the 4K for this brand new for like £7 or something. They must have made way too many copies of this for the amount of people who wanted to buy it. And now it's kind of cheap, but that's good for us people who do want to watch this, because, yeah, it's the bee's knees. And it's going through to my grand final. So there we have it, 2020, a much spoiled movie in cinema, but somehow we still got some amazing movies out of it, like the ones that I've just been describing. So check those out if you've not already seen them. And I don't think I have any films from 2020 that I've not seen that I want to. I think I wrote one or two down. Let's have a look. Possessor. I've heard that's really good. Freaky is another one. Oh, and The Lodge. So I did write some down. I'd just forgotten. But yeah. So there we have it. So we've got Tenet and Underwater going through to my grand final of 100 films. I'll be back soon to do 2021. We've only got 2 more videos now before the grand final, 2021 and 2022. So we are slowly getting there. Until next time, cheerio. Bye-bye.